Well, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and dive in. I know our session is just beginning and people will keep funneling in, but welcome again. My name is Megan Mell. I'm the Director of Alumni Experiences in the College of Liberal Arts, and I will be your moderator tonight for our session, More Than a Bubble Bath, Strategies for Building Resilience in the Face of Work Stress and Burnout. And I am very excited about this session. It's been a difficult time for many of us, and it's a very relevant topic. This session is brought to you by Happy with Work, which teaches organizations mindful, positive approaches to fostering well-being in their staff and serving their clientele. Thank you to Happy with Work for sponsoring the UMAA's Career Month. Now, during this session, we do ask the audience that you leave your camera off and remain muted. We will have a 15-minute Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation, and then during the presentation, you can drop any questions you have for our presenter in the Q&A tab found at the right side of your screen, kind of towards the bottom. Or during the Q&A portion of the session, you can certainly request to turn on your camera, unmute, and ask a question directly if that is your preference. So now I would just like to introduce our speaker for tonight. I'm so glad to welcome CLA alum Laura Harder as tonight's speaker. Laura is the founder of Happy with Work, LLC. She is a certified compassion fatigue therapist and a psychology instructor at Metropolitan State University. Having worked in human services, Laura witnessed firsthand how the demands of the job combined with dynamics of the workplace can lead to good practitioners leaving the field. As a researcher, she explores the causes of burnout in human services and the effect of practitioner stress on their success with clients. She now works with organizations to eliminate extraneous stressors to allow their staff to be well and serve well. By using psychology theory to create self-care techniques, Laura's presentation style is as warm and interactive as it is informative. She believes self-care is a lens we use rather than a thing we do. Laura, thank you so much for being here. I am going to turn things over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Megan. And those of you, if you're able to, if you'd like to spotlight me or pin me. Oh, actually, now I think I might be full screen. I think that's how this works. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I'm so excited to be working with my alma mater. This is just, I'm very happy to be here sharing, my own expertise with my fellow Gophers. It's a happy spot for me to be. So as an instructor, I always like to get things started by having you all think a little bit about your own experiences. So I'd like you to start by just either thinking or jotting down 3 things that are particularly stressful about work. And we're going to come back to this, and you don't have to share if you don't want to. But just jot them down for now so you can kind of refer to them during the presentation. And then once you've jotted down 3 things that are particularly stressful, I'd like you to move on to writing down 3 things that you love about work, 3 of your favorite things about your job. Give you guys another 30 seconds or so. You don't have to choose the absolute best or the absolute worst things, just 3 things that come to mind. So I know that at last year's, at last year's Connections event, there was another seminar on what is burnout and where is it caused. And just in case other folks weren't there, I just want to give very, very bare bones basic definitions here. So we're all on the same page as what burnout is and what it isn't. So burnout is categorized as having 3 core components. The first one being emotional exhaustion. So emotional exhaustion is just that feeling of being used up at the end of the day. When you get home, you're just so tired. And it also can be categorized by having like a short fuse, right? So that's the emotion piece, is feeling like you just don't have anything left to give. The next one is depersonalization. So this is when you're feeling like, I just need my own space, right? Even if you're an extrovert like me, you're just feeling like, I just want to lay on the couch and not talk to anybody, right? This also can look like cynicism. So feeling a little cynical, like, yeah, right. Not believing people, kind of, not giving the benefit of the doubt, feeling a little bit more negative toward and callous toward people. Last one is a decreased sense of self-accomplishment, personal accomplishment in your profession. So feeling like what you do doesn't matter, feeling like, you're not making any real progress, wondering what is this all about. Those are all characteristics of burnout. So these are actual measures from an actual burnout measure. These are some actual statements that you would be measured on. So burnout sounds like, gosh, I feel used up at the end of the day. I feel trapped by my job. I don't really care what happens to some clients, customers, whoever. I don't really care about the outcome of my job. I deal very, very effectively with problems at work. So that would be, the opposite of burnout. I feel drained from my work. I've become more callous toward people since taking this job. Another protective factor here, I have accomplished many worthwhile things at this job, and I feel like I'm working too hard, right? Like I just am working so hard and it's not really slowing down. So these are the statements that you would hear if you're feeling burnt out, or a colleague is burnt out. Now, what causes burnout? There are a lot of studies on what causes burnout, and Maslach and Leiter are two of the pioneers in burnout research. Maslach is actually the one that made the Maslach burnout inventory. She's the first one to actually measure burnout as an actual construct. And they've kind of dwindled it down to 6 core causes of burnout, or factors that influence someone's burnout. And they call it the 6 areas of work life. And when I tell people about this theory, it feels like, oh, yes, it's that. That is what I'm feeling, or that's what I'm missing from work. So I always like to tell people about this because it feels like you're justified, right? It feels valid. So the first one being workload. So you want enough work to be engaged and excited in your work, but you don't want so much that you feel overwhelmed or like you're drowning in it. So it's kind of finding that sweet spot. The next one is the sense of community. Do you have a sense of community at work? Do you have people you can connect with, that you feel like you can trust? And that can be your boss. It doesn't have to be. It can be, people that work underneath you. It can be your colleagues. It can be people in a different department. It can be people that you work with outside of the organization that you collaborate with. As long as you have people that you feel get it in your corner, that's a sense of community at work. A sense of control. So this is supposed to be red tape. Feeling like you have autonomy in your job. Feeling like you can do things like, hey, Friday afternoon, I have a dentist appointment. Is it okay that I leave for a couple hours, right? Not feeling so tied down to your job. It also feels like autonomy to make decisions. So feeling like you're trusted by your boss or your colleagues to make decisions on what to do next in your role. A sense of reward, feeling like you are compensated appropriately for your position, as well as acknowledged on a social level. So feeling like your boss, feeling like your colleagues are acknowledge your importance in the organization, and what it is that you do really matters, and that you're really part of the team. So feeling like that's a sense of social reward, feeling recognized for the important work that you do. A sense of fairness. So fairness being that decisions that are made in the organization are made based on merit, not necessarily who you know, and that even if you don't agree with the decision, that you're at least feel like your voice is being heard. And lastly, a sense of values. So we all have values, right? Values dictate how and what we do in a day. And sometimes values rub up against each other. And when this happens between your values and what the organization values, or what that role values in you, it can, if you deal with that kind of tension for a long period of time, it can lead to burnout. So quick question, you can throw it up in the chat if you want to take a guess. But out of these 6, there's workload, community, control, reward, fairness, and values. Which one do you think is the most predictive of whether or not someone is going to stay at a job? Whether or not someone's going to leave? If you had none of them except one, what's the one that matters for retention? Anyone want to guess? Workload, community. Community is my favorite because I'm an extrovert. Getting a lot of community. It's actually fairness. Fairness. If people feel like they understand why decisions are being made, they can kind of get behind you. I think it's actually really fascinating. And I think the reason why is that these other needs, you can kind of get met in other areas, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. So things like community, you can have friends outside of work, right? And get that social need met. I personally really struggle with not having a sense of community or having too high of a workload, or not enough workload. But fairness is the one that consistently is predictive of turnover, which I think is quite fascinating. Okay, so now the whole reason we're here, right? I'm going to give you my patented 5 steps to combating burnout. Are you guys ready? That's why we're all here, right? Okay, I'm joking. There's actually no steps. I'm sorry to get your hopes up. The reason there are no, sorry, Marissa. The reason that there aren't any steps, because if they existed, none of us would be experiencing burnout, right? And so, like the title says, it's more than a bubble bath, right? It's more than yoga. And when I worked in the shelter downtown Minneapolis, I got so frustrated by seminars on burnout that I would feel like, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to leave knowing exactly how to take care of myself, right? And after years of working there, years of seminars where they say, take a deep breath, you'll feel fine, right? Just do some yoga, do some stretching, and doing years and years of research, I realized that it has nothing to do with what you do, right? There's no magic pill to combat burnout. It has everything to do with how you're doing things. And not only how you do things like self-care, like a bubble bath, right? If that's how you define bubble bath. I always like using bubble baths and yoga because I personally love bubble baths and I love yoga. I do yoga regularly. But they have kind of turned into this like cartoon of what self-care looks like. And it has nothing to do, I mean, if you're taking a bubble bath, but sitting there dwelling on this presentation you have the next day in front of this group that you really hate, that bubble bath is not going to do you any good, right? If you're doing yoga, but sitting there, stressing out about, your boss and how horrible they are and how micromanaging they are, it's not going to solve any problems, right? So it's everything to do with the lens that you're using, which is what, Megan said in my bio, is that I believe that self-care is a perspective we take. It's a lens that we use to see the world, to see our family, to see our work. And it has everything to do with how we're prioritizing ourselves and our mental health above anything else, right? And how is it that we can do what's best for us in every single interaction that we have? So what can we do if there's no 5 steps, right? First thing, so I asked a few clients actually that I worked with. I was like, what is the most helpful to hear? Because I have 30 minutes here. I've got 30 minutes with my fellow alums. What should I be saying? And most people think that it's really helpful to be reminded that it's more of a system problem than it is a you problem, right? Yes, of course, there are things that we can do to make ourselves feel better, to make sure that we're not being too stressed out, to recognize our triggers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, if you're in a bad job, in a bad organization, there's only so much self-care that you can do to get through the day. It's more than you. It is more than you. So remembering that and being validated in that. Remembering again that self-care is not a thing we do. If you're waiting until 5 p.m. to get to go to the gym to run it out, it's not going to do you much good, right? You need to learn how to cope through every single interaction in your day. And interactions not only with other people, but with yourself. Those conversations that you're having internally really matter. And so that being said, there are still things you can do to cope. So I know you're here for some strategies, so I'm going to give you some, okay? The first one being control. I know I mentioned control is one of the predictors of burnout. So take a look at that list that I had you write, those 3 things. And I'd like you to think about the elements that surround those stressors and consider what is within your control around those. And examine what ones are not in your control. Is it within your control? Is your boss's personality within your control? Right? Is, I don't know, the way you schedule your clients. That's within your control, right? When you open up Outlook for me is the big trigger. I don't know if anyone else has that, but every time I hear the Outlook chime, I had to turn it off my phone. So examine what's not in your control and consider, is this something that you can accept, right, in this job? Is this something that you can cope with? Can you figure out a way to live with this? And only you have those answers, right? The next thing that's also helpful, and I hated it when people would tell me this, so stick with me, I'm going to try to make it a little easier to swallow, is meet your own needs. Now, this sounds deceivingly simple, but it's really hard, right? And the reason why it's really important to pay attention to other needs of yours outside of work, within and out of work, is because if you're getting certain needs met, it's going to reduce your overall stress load, right? And when our overall stress load is reduced, we're less reactive. And when we're less reactive, we're less likely to take on more and more stress. So it's going to lower your overall stress load, and it's going to help you keep perspective. So doing things like eating well. You know, I was talking with my brother-in-law last week about his experience with burnout, and he's like, Laura, I haven't made myself food in 3.5 weeks. I just am so exhausted. I need to just order in every night. And I'm like, that's hard. You know, you need a salad, right? You need to eat some vegetables. And so just making sure that you eat, right? That's another thing, you know, just making sure. If I don't call my husband, he'll remember to feed the kids, but he'll forget to feed himself, you know, making sure that you're eating well. Getting social needs met, that sense of community, right? If you don't have it at work, make sure you're getting it met somewhere else. Make sure you're connecting with friends. Make sure you're meeting colleagues, things like this, right? You know, network outside of your job if you're not getting that sense of community within it. A sense of spirituality, however that you define that, right? We all have a need for higher level, higher order thinking of, you know, connecting to something bigger than us. And however that seems to fit for you, whether it's journaling, whether it's church, whether it's meditation, whether it's walking in nature. You know, I have a good friend of mine who once told me that nature is her church. And I'm like, that's beautiful, right? Yeah, go for a hike, connect with whatever it is that's bigger than you. And lastly, make sure you're getting sleep. Now, this is easier said than done, because poor sleep is also a symptom of burnout. So however you can get your body to rest before bed is critical. Turning off all screens for at least an hour more if you can, right? Not sleeping next to your phone, having a cup of tea or whatever you need to kind of tell your body, okay, it's time to fall asleep, right? I am a huge firm believer. We listen to audiobooks in our house every single night. And there's something about the guy that narrates Game of Thrones that he puts me to bed every single time. And so the other thing I wanted to mention is that not only taking care of these needs does it lower your overall stress load, it also helps you keep perspective. So when life becomes bigger than work is not so big, right? It doesn't feel like the end all be all that, oh my gosh, life is horrible because work is horrible. When you're connecting with people, when you're connecting with your spirituality, when your body feels good, when you have hobbies, work is not as big of a deal as it can be when you're not getting those other needs met. Okay, so a couple more exercises. So some people need like homework, right? The first thing I'm going to have you do is, I should have grabbed myself an empty piece of paper. Okay. If you have a piece of paper, draw a circle in the middle of it. In that circle, I'd like you to write the 3 things that you wrote down that are the most stressful parts of your job, okay? I put XYZ because I'm not going to name names tonight. This is being recorded. After that, I'd like you to draw a circle outside of it. I think you can maybe guess where we're going. And I'm going to write the 3 things that I love about work. So I wrote Megan, Marissa, and Melissa because they've been big helps. And actually, I'm not sure if Melissa Green, who's in here and contributing, if you're the Melissa I worked with to help, but regardless, I appreciate your your participation here. And then the last thing, we're going to do one more. My daughter would be so excited. She loves Target. I'm teaching her well. One more. I'd like you to put 3 things, at least 3. You can fill it in later. 3 things that you love outside of work. Okay. This one I can share. I have kayaking, Lando, he's my dog, and walks with my kids, which is true. I love walks with the kids, unless it's really cold. So now, I'd like you to do this. Okay? Make a circle. Notice, think of this as your attention and your focus, okay? It can only cover this size. So you can choose. Most of our attention during the day goes to that middle circle, right? When we're stressed out, our automatic psyche is ingrained to look for threat. When we are stressed, we're looking for threat. So we're looking in that middle circle. That's only going to increase our stress more. So what you can do is you can force your attention to pull outside of that middle circle. Look at the positives of your job. What is it that you love about your job? Focus on that for 5 minutes. Let yourself do something you enjoy for 5 minutes. And if you're having a horrible day and there's nothing you can do to escape it, think about what you're going to do after work. Look at that outside circle and consider what is it that you're going to do after work that's going to make you feel better. Oh, that's this one. It's supposed to be the spotlight. Okay, so that's kind of like an attentional spotlight practice that I created for, okay, you only have this much focus. Choose what goes in it. That's within your control, right? That your boss can't take from you. The be here now. I know I kind of teased about take a deep breath. You're fine. The thing about deep breathing is that you have to do it correctly. If you take a deep breath from up here, like you're running, you're actually igniting your stress response. I'm not going to nerd out and talk about all the different variations, the parts of the nervous system, but just trust me. If you're breathing from up here, from your chest and your lungs, you're telling your body that you're running away from a threat. Okay. Nothing wrong with that if you're trying to get some cardio. But if what you're trying to do is take a deep breath to calm down after a horrible conversation with your manager, what you need to do is take a belly breath. So I'm going to stand up. I'd like everyone, let's see, can you see me? Hang on. Right down here, right below your belly button is where I'd like you to put your hands. And when you take a deep breath, try to make a move, kind of like a Santa Claus belly, okay? Like a balloon in your belly. And what we're going to do is I'm going to have you take 3 deep breaths with me. and then we're going to get to Q&A, okay? So but before we do it, I'm going to walk you through it, okay? One time. First thing we could do is we're going to completely exhale all the stale air out of our lungs and out of our belly, okay? And then I'm going to say, okay, inhale, full belly. So you're going to make your belly really big. And then I'm going to say, inhale into chest. So you can feel the difference between breathing in your stomach and breathing in your chest. And then we're going to full exhale. We're going to do that 3 times. Ideally, you'll breathe in through your nose, exhale out your mouth. Don't get caught up in that. If you're like me and you have asthma and that's too hard, don't worry about it. Just breathe. Just breathe. The only other thing is put your palms up, like you're reaching out to a cute little puppy that you don't want them to be threatened, right? When you have your palms up, you're telling your brain that there's no threat. There's nothing to be ready to fight against if you have your palms up, okay? So everyone, palms up, get comfy, close your eyes. You don't have to close your eyes, but just don't look at your phone, essentially. Look down, gaze downward, don't pay attention to anything. Don't be reading notes or anything. Just don't be distracted, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, get comfortable. We'll start with a full exhale. Inhale, full belly. Inhale into chest. And exhale. Inhale, full belly. Inhale into chest. And exhale. Last one. Inhale, full belly. Into chest. And exhale. Now, before you open your eyes or come back to me, just take a minute to kind of feel your body sitting in the chair, feel your hands on your lap, your feet on the ground. And ideally, you would do this before and after, and you'd feel just how big of a difference those 3 breaths can make. So when you're ready, open your eyes. And so 3 breaths. I don't know about you, but I feel you can tell my voice, right? I'm no longer up here really excited, kind of slowing down. 3 breaths takes less than a minute. It usually takes me about 45 seconds to walk people through that. So if you do that every time you fill up your coffee, every time you walk to the bathroom, just do that a few times a day, or right after a tough conversation. It'll bring your heart rate back down so at least you can move forward with your day, not being revved up in your stress response. So here's my contact information. Like I said, half hour is not a lot of time to try to solve burnout. But I'm hoping that I gave you at least a few tips that you can take with you. Tomorrow's Friday, yippee, right? But that you could take with you tomorrow and into next week to try to reposition your focus, reposition your perspective, and give you some more energy moving forward. So please feel free to write down my contact information. I'm looking forward to connecting. And so if you have any questions, feel free to put them up in the Q&A, as well as, any general comments or things that you want me to go over again. I'm happy to help. I'm here. That's what I'm here for.
Hello?
Hi, Melissa.
Oh, hi. Oh my gosh, I did not realize that was going to happen like that. Okay. Hello. Hi, everyone. I really appreciated all that you shared. Do you have any reflections or thoughts about, as a job seeker, looking at assessing the environment that you're potentially working in for like what burnout level staff are already at and how that could impact you? Things about in that nature as you're as a job seeker thinking about burnout.
That's a really good question. I've never been asked that before.
Ooh, good.
So, I mean, I'm really curious, but I read, this was a recommendation on LinkedIn, so take it or leave it, but I thought it was actually really brilliant. Someone asked, why is this position open? Like why did the previous person leave, right? And from that, you can kind of gauge, it's a question people often don't see coming too. And so you'll probably get a pretty honest answer. You could also ask, how do you prioritize employee well-being, right? And how do you feel about work-life balance? And you're probably going to get a lot of lip service of, oh, it's very important, right? And so asking for very concrete examples of like, what's the process of using PTO? How flexible is it to make my own schedule? And consider what are the things that you need to prevent burnout. Some people don't care that they have to get there right at 9 and they can't leave until 5. That doesn't bother them, but they need to be able to take off for their kids' conferences, right? And so whatever it is that you really need, don't be afraid to ask and say like, look, how do you feel about, Thursday at lunch, I need to go to my yoga class. Is that going to be an issue? And advocating for that. Yeah, that's a good question though, man.
Yeah.
And you could ask too. Yeah, you could ask too if they've ever done, like a culture audit, or if they ever, do employee, how would you word that? Like an employee experience, do you ever do 360 interviews or get employee feedback on how they're doing? Okay, or you can even ask, what do you do to prevent burnout in your staff?
Yeah. I guess that is true. Yeah. Cool. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, of course.
Laura, I wanted to call your attention to a couple of questions that have come in written.
Yeah.
Do you see where those are?
I do. The first one was, how would you recommend talking to your boss or manager about feeling burned out? So this one I wish was an easy answer. And this is one that I hear a lot, and it honestly depends on the manager and your relationship with them. I'm a firm believer that nothing's going to get better unless you let them know, right? And you might be surprised at how much they care. Lando is here. He's from my happy circle. He's saying hi. So you might be surprised at how much support you get in that situation. The only issue is that depending on the boss, right? Some people might unfortunately see it as a weakness. And so you kind of have to tread lightly. And so if you maybe, instead of using the word burnout, expressing that you've been experiencing high levels of work stress and that you need to take some time off or reevaluate your responsibilities and seeing if you can delegate some of that. I hear my daughter too. She might be joining us too. So I hope that helps. Again, I'm sorry. It really honestly depends. And if you'd like to, email me with your specific situation, I'd happily walk you through it. And then another person said, seeking suggestions for how to create boundaries at work in hopes of breaking the cycle of constant work and exhaustion. So now, again, deep breaths only work if you're doing it well. What I will say is that if you're able to lower your heart rate in those situations where you're feeling, when I hear boundaries at work, I'm thinking emotional boundaries. I'm thinking boundaries around my stress response and not letting everything impact it, right? My stress response is mine. I own it. I'm not going to let just anyone impact it. So what I have found helps is doing just even taking 1 or 2 deep breaths in those rough situations where you're feeling like, okay, that I'm having a conversation that's really igniting my stress right now. I'm going to just I'm going to start breathing from my belly, and that's going to lower your heart rate as much as possible, right? In those situations, and giving yourself let's see, boundaries at work. Gosh, recognizing what's within your control, right? So if you're looking at Outlook at 8:30 at night, I'm totally guilty of this. I look and be like, oh, I'm just going to see what my day is like tomorrow. And then I end up looking and answering emails, right before bed. And I say, Laura, what are you doing? Stop, right? And it takes practice to kind of break some of those bad habits, but not being afraid to say, nope, this is my time. Like, this is, I'm not being paid for this. This is not worth it. This can wait for tomorrow. And practicing some of that. How do you know when it's time to move on from a job due to burnout? When are you too burned out? That is a question only you can answer. I knew I was too burned out when I read in a book once that said, it's called Trauma Stewardship. And the author, I read the whole book front to back, and it was toward the end. She said, and if you try all these things and it's still not helping, it's time to think, can I do this anymore? Is this worth it? And those words really struck me. I thought, oh my gosh, I don't think I can do this anymore, right? And so I find if you think about, okay, what if you stay for a month? What if you stay for 6 months, right? And if you think, oh my gosh, 6 months, there's no way I could stay. How long can you stay and reevaluate, right? So is it just a month? Is it just a week? Can you stay one more week, right? And then decide, and let yourself reevaluate frequently. But, fortunately, and not in all fields, but fortunately right now, there's a lot of places that, it's not a bad time to be changing your career. But again, I would happily if you jot down my information, I'd happily help you out if you want to talk further about whether or not it's time to go. Megan's asking, are there any other books you would recommend reading? Trauma Stewardship is huge, especially if you work with people, by Laura Vandernoot Lipsky is her name. And I just read her new one that's a little bit more broad, outside of people work, called The Age of Overwhelm. And that one is incredible. And that one is for everybody, how we're all overwhelmed and why, how our culture kind of has impacted that, and what we can do to help ourselves through it. So those are two that come to mind right away. I mean, all the other ones I read are like really dry. They're like textbook kind of stuff. But I read a lot of, like I'm reading Nudge, and I'm really bad at remembering authors. That's another reason Nudge. There's another book that I just started reading on play and how important play is for our mental well-being, and what is play and why don't we do it anymore, right? A lot of that stuff. So again, I'd happily make recommendations if folks want them. I'm kind of a nerd. Any other questions? I see Megan here.
I'm jumping in. Yes.
I was going to say that must mean it's about time to move on to the next. So.
It is. If there are any questions, we probably have time for about one more. So if anyone wants to pop that into the chat or the Q&A, please do so. But Laura, thank you so much for those book recommendations. That was great. I don't know if there's any podcasts that you listen to that you would recommend that are maybe helpful when you're trying to relax.
What's funny is that like I try not to recommend her because I find her so annoying and how quotable she is. But Brene Brown's new is it Unlocking Us, I think is the name of her podcast. But I love how relatable she makes everything. And it just makes me think about things in a different way, that I feel like she gets it. And she also has really concrete ways of helping think of things in a different way. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, just a general thank you again, Laura, for taking the time to provide some really helpful strategies into dealing with work stress, burnout, and hopefully how to get ahead of it. And to our audience, you are now invited back to the main stage for a quick break with the U of M's Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. And then after that, there will be some time for open networking that I hope you all take advantage of. So thank you again for joining us and have a great night.
Thank you.